Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about this. This is the GBA Consolizer. Before we get into that though, if you guys could do me a favor, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't done that already, and of course check out my new channel, which is about flying and eating and me getting fatter while going on adventures. But if you could also do me a favor and hit me up in the social media stuff, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, etc. I appreciate all that. Okay, thank you. Enough of that. Now, let's move on. Yes, we're going to be talking about the GBA Consolizer. This one was sent to me for free for the purposes of review, full disclosure on that, by my buddy Justin at Power Up Gaming. I've done a bunch of videos on his stuff in the past. He did my, hacked fat PS3. I once covered the HDMI modified N64. He knows what he's doing. He's done a bunch of stuff. You can check out his website. There's a link in the description. You can check out this or any of the other stuff he's worked on. Now, that said, he's just the guy who did the model, the installation and the service. So he's kind of like a store, and he also does, installations if you want to send stuff in, etc. But he didn't design this or anything. So this was designed by a guy named Woozle, or at least obviously that's what he goes by. So what is it? Let's talk about it here. Now, it's a very small little device, and the concept of it should be relatively simple. Right here is a Game Boy Advance, but in a consolized form. Simple concept, right? So what this really is, if you want to break it down, is this has actually been on the market for quite a few years. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the first introduction of this was actually back in 2018. And what it essentially is just an original Game Boy Advance. You can see one here, although ironically this is a customized one that's got a special screen. I did a video on it years ago, but yeah, that one's great. But basically you could take that model of the Game Boy Advance, take out the motherboard, and basically put it into a new shell, along with obviously taking Woozle's board, which is basically an FPGA designed to tap into the video signal of the console and output it via HDMI, thus a consolized Game Boy Advance. This particular shell that's on it was actually designed by Laser Bear Productions. I think it's Laser Bear Productions. I know it's Laser Bear, but I think it's Laser Bear Productions. He does a bunch of 3D printed stuff. It's all good things. You can check it out his website as well if you want, and you can get those type of things set up. I know that he did the GC loader thing that I have in my GameCube, but yeah, etc. But actually, yeah, it's the one that's in there was his design. We'll get back to that in a little bit. But yeah, the core concept of this is, yeah, it's just a Game Boy Advance with HDMI output. And so as a result, it's cool because it doesn't actually, the case that we've got here doesn't have any screws. It actually all mounts together. That's the way Laser Bear designed it, was that it would just kind of clasp all together. On the back, from the actual Woozle board, you have HDMI output, which is HDMI micro or mini, and you have USB micro, the one that was more common with the PS4 and the Xbox One. You also have, we'll talk about that in a second, we also have the original headphone jack from the Game Boy Advance, as well as the volume dial. This isn't entirely necessary, although it is technically possible to use. You do have the option, and there's a DVI mode on this thing. If you want to activate that, it would be more logical to use the headphone jack at that point. Though this really seems like just a function. It's not necessarily required in any way, shape, or form. On the front, of course, you have the cartridge slot. You have the expansion port slot, which was really used for devices like the link cable, which we'll get back to. And you have what he added, which was an SNES-style controller port. Yes, this thing actually runs with Super Nintendo controllers, which is awesome, but we'll get back to that as well. And then you have this little section here, which is the power button, or more accurately, a power switch, because you can just kind of click it up and down. I actually have two switches. One is all purple, the same color as the plastic, but Justin was cool enough to give me a second one that actually, is transparent. That way I could kind of see through it, and he just gave me the choice. I decided to stick with the clear one because I like the idea of being able to see through and see the lights. Inside, if you get the original kit, in addition to having the actual board and all the things you need to connect it together, there's some additional options you can do. You can add LEDs, which Justin went ahead and did. That way you can tell when the power is on, which I like. And if you want, you can replace the capacitors, which I believe Justin also did as well. So this is pretty much as tricked out as you can possibly get. It also has rubber feet to kind of keep it in place, but ultimately it's a small little device that just kind of sits there and plays your Game Boy games. Now again, this is not new. This has been around for years at this point. People have done videos on it a long time, but I never had access to it, and now I wanted to talk about it and kind of, look at it now and see what else I might have noticed about it that might be kind of interesting for one reason or another. So let's do that. The first thing to understand about this is when this first came out, there was a lot of controversy around it. I actually remember this because a lot of people were getting really mad that people were essentially gutting, in their view, Game Boy Advances just for the purposes of making this. Now, I can see that view as someone who cares about console preservation and historical preservation, etc. I mean, I do cleaning videos, and I carry around the Sega Pluto prototype to make sure people can see that thing while it still works and it's still part of our world. I get it. But at the same time, the Game Boy Advance was mass-produced in I think there was 100 million units of that thing. It was an extraordinarily successful device. And I will speak to the standpoint of yeah, maybe don't ruin a fully operational one that has no issues. I mean, it's your choice. I would never say it's not your choice if you are the owner of it. But I will say where this really shines is saving dead units. There's a lot of Game Boy Advances in this world that just have bad screens or have issues that they can get a whole new lease on life if they're consoleized. I remember I used to be pre-pandemic, I used to be able to go to Japan all the time, and you would open up these junk bins and there would just be tons of Game Boy Advances in there, but all of them would have cracked, destroyed screens. I think if I had known about the Consolizer, if it had been a little bit more common at that point, I might have started, just getting a bunch of those and bringing them back just so they could have new life, eventually donate them to people who have Consolizers or have the kit, etc. But that is not how that played out. Point is, don't feel bad about it. There's a lot of Game Boy Advances in the world, and it's, I look at it as you can save a Game Boy Advance. You don't have to kill one to make it. There's a lot of junk ones on eBay too. So taking a look at the device itself, how does it perform? Well, I love that it has the Super Nintendo controller port. I really love that. I actually think that's one of the best unsung features of it. Now, obviously, people know about it, but to me, that's huge. And the reason it's huge is not just the convenience of it, because it obviously works with Super Nintendo controller standard ones, but it also works with those newer ones, like the 8-bit DOE ones and everything. So if you have those wireless, Bluetooth ones, that'll work on here as well. I like going with the actual stock one. And the reason that means so much to me is I've said in the past, and I still maintain this, the Game Boy Advance, to me, is really the spiritual sequel to the Super Nintendo we didn't exactly get. Nintendo continued to make consoles, they made the N64, but to me that never felt as magical as the Super Nintendo. Now, part of that's my age and what I played when I was a kid, etc. But to me, the Game Boy Advance is kind of, in an alternate timeline, what Nintendo would have made as a console after the Super Nintendo. It's still 2D, it still, has those capabilities, it can play basically the Super Nintendo library, but enhance upon them, and has additional visual benefits and all that, and it just feels more what Nintendo was kind of going for back in the day. So even though that's not what they ultimately did, it just feels like that. It just feels like an alternate timeline where this was their sequel, and to actually have it in a console form now is awesome. So using the Super Nintendo controller, to me, is just perfection. I'm really glad that they did that. So let's talk a little bit more about it from the hardware perspective. Now, again, it's original Nintendo hardware, so it's compatible essentially with everything that ever really existed with the actual Game Boy Advance. Meaning, the Game Boy Advance famously was compatible with the original Game Boy library. It was compatible with the Game Boy Color library, and it was compatible with its own library, making it really kind of an awesome platform because it could support so much. So having a consoleized version of it means you get a lot of games all at once. Now, obviously, Nintendo themselves thought of this. That's why the GameCube itself is sitting here. They would at some point, I think it was around 2002 or 2003, release the Game Boy player you see attached to the bottom of the GameCube. Now, as cool as that is, the issue with it was kind of famously that while the hardware was good, it was essentially just a motherboard that used the cartridge slot as a way of reading a ROM. That's all it really did, because the actual Game Boy, if you will, in it was the software disk that came with it, which was really just a Game Boy Advance emulator written for the GameCube. And famously, not that great of one. Not terrible by any means, especially back in the day, but now it has kind of not aged so well. And I understand, and I know, because I even use it, there are more modern solutions to that. There's entire Game Boy Advance emulators written for the GameCube by the GameCube community, and they run on, this is a modded console I showed you, it has the GC loader in it. It can run that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, that is still emulation. What's cool about this is this is the actual Game Boy original hardware. So you're not doing any emulation aside from the FPGA, which is essentially just emulating other hardware to give you that HDMI output. But the actual game performance is original hardware all day long. So that means that it has no compatibility issues except for the actual compatibility issues that would have existed with the original model of the Game Boy Advance. Now, I don't consider myself a Game Boy massive historian, but so I can't cite any specific examples of games maybe for the Game Boy original or Game Boy Color that didn't function quite properly on this. You have to understand the Game Boy is the most successful portable line that ever existed, and the sheer amount of peripherals and games that exist for it is a lot. It's a stunning amount, so I can't promise 100% compatibility. But what I can promise is that it did work with essentially everything that was made for this. But I did find some exceptions, which I found kind of interesting, and I wanted to point them out because I know people will bring them up. Right here, we have the Ereader. Now, this is an interesting one. Does anybody even remember this thing? The Ereader was a device that Nintendo made for the Game Boy Advance that actually had this little credit card type of slot on it, and there were card games, and they were very simplistic games, and you would swipe them through there, and that's how you'd play the games. Now, here's the funny thing. As I said, this is original hardware, so technically speaking, it does work, and we'll pop it on there. I've intentionally muted the sound. Now you can see it actually boots up, and you can see the e-reader going on. But you notice a problem very quickly. It tells you to press the A button. Well, you can't, because this thing is so big and bulky, it blocks the controller port, so you actually have no way of interacting with it. So, as I said, everything that works on this works on this. This is actually a limitation of the Consolizer specifically because of where the controller port was placed. So the e-reader doesn't work, if you get my drift. Unfortunately, it's also not the only time that happened. Granted, this is even more obscure, but it's the same basic idea. The original Game Genie for the original Game Boy. Yes, we're going there. The Game Genie. Now, this is the exact same situation. It will physically fit in there, even though it looks ridiculous. And the console will recognize it. It will boot up. It will show up on screen. I'm not even going to bother displaying because it's pointless. You get it. But it's the exact same flaw. The controller port is blocked, thus not being able to read in there. So it's, you know, whatever. It's not like I needed that, but it's worth acknowledging. It's worth acknowledging. Technically, those things are not compatible, even though they do boot, just because of a specific decision made with this. Now, would I truly criticize it for that? No. Like, would it have been nice if the controller port was in a different spot? Yeah, but like whatever, because it's such a minor thing. But one thing I guess I want to criticize it for this, but I can't because I have to remember the time in which this was designed. I do not like the fact that it has USB micro and HDMI mini on the back. USB micro is famously flimsy. It breaks the most easily of all of them. USB-C would be nice. We'll say that with an asterisk. And HDMI mini is also annoying because it's not even close to the standard. In fact, to connect it to this monitor, the console has HDMI mini. The monitor has HDMI mini. I don't have an HDMI mini to HDMI mini cable around because that's kind of absurd. So you actually have to run it through, I have to run it through one converter and then through another converter right back, just in the normal HDMI cable in the middle. And I should not even converter, an adapter, just, you know, a pin shape adapter essentially. So it's fine, but that's like a minor thing. Had this been designed now, I would say, yeah, USB-C is really what should be in there, and probably full-size HDMI ports. But again, this was probably designed in like 2017-ish, and it was probably starting around then. So I can't really knock them because USB-C really wasn't a thing. And I think there was more issues with trying to use full-size HDMI at the time than there are now. But anyway, that's a side thing. That's kind of like complaining that the Sega Genesis isn't powerful enough in 2022. Yeah, you don't say. but anyway. Yeah, so those are really the only criticisms I would have. One thing that's actually, I think, kind of interesting to note, and you can tell they went out of their way to do this, the front expansion port there for the link cable actually does work. They actually made sure of it, and fortunately for us, we have a GameCube next to us, so we can actually show that in action to an extent. But any Game Boy Advance game like Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, I know supported, I believe it linked up with Sonic Advance for the GameCube, and you could do the Chow Garden thing. That will work in the scenario where you have like two different TVs where you've set both of these up. But yes, that technically will function. There's no reason it wouldn't. But yes, just pointing that out for anybody who's curious. But yeah, that's kind of the basic rundown there with a little basic history. So let's talk about some of the game support, I think. I think that would be a good idea. Specifically, I'll just show you a Game Boy Advance game, like how it actually looks. Now the console, I should probably plug in a controller, shouldn't I? There we go. The console outputs at 720p. Now, I don't know this to be sure, so speculation time. The Game Boy Advance had a relatively low resolution screen, logically so. It was a portable intended for children back in like 2001. That makes sense. And then the previous models of the Game Boy Color, and the Game Boy Original had even lower resolutions. Getting those resolutions to display on a modern screen would be difficult. A lot of monitors wouldn't necessarily support it, so you have to use a higher resolution. But you don't want to go like to 4K because that's going to look really bad. It's just too blown out. So I kind of feel like 720p was an interesting compromise because it's like the lowest high-def resolution that's still considered modern that most monitors, if not all monitors, are going to understand, while also being the least insulting and degrading to the original material. Now the console itself has a lot of built-in settings for this if you want to get around it. So if you have it plugged in with powered up and show whatever, you press select and down at the same time and you'll see this little screen. Now on the screen it's got a few different options. The first one is picture. Now picture, there's a ton of different features there that you can spend your time tinkering with, but it's got smoothing features, kind of like artificial smoothing features, kind of like anti-aliasing and all that sort of stuff, and you can set it however you prefer it. Zooming features, depending on the aspect ratio supported by a particular game or platform, because again, this device obviously supports original Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance, so each one uses slightly different dimensions. Notably, the Game Boy Advance used widescreen where the original two did not, and you can adjust around, but it also has different border frames, and you just kind of adjust that based on the settings you have and what TV you are using. Color changing, you can change the color palette. Obviously, well, there's also palette, and then there's gamma. There's a lot of details in there. There's whole videos that break down very specifically what this does. This is just kind of to give you a rough idea. There's also scan lines in there, which you can turn on, you can turn off, you can make thicker, whatever, if you want that CRT look, etc. All that kind of stuff is there, highly customizable. It's all available to you if you want to check it out. I found the system settings more interesting, to be honest. The DVI one, like I said, you can use that. You can get your headphone jack here for audio in that case. I personally can't think of a scenario in which this would be useful unless your only monitor around does not have HDMI input. I mean, there's got to be somebody who thought that made sense. Obviously, Woozle did because he put it there, but probably because he had a headphone jack to work with, so he's like, whatever, I don't know. But I speculation. I don't know that to be sure. There might be other benefits to it. It supports different video frequencies. This particular monitor only supports 60 hertz, so it's not going to show anything else. But I believe it has probably 50 hertz for the PAL users. I don't know that to be certain because I have no way of testing that. But yeah, there's going to be a few in there. I want to say 120 was an option, but I might be misremembering that. Either way, I just leave it to 60 because that's what it's supposed to be. You have button display options, which I believe will show actual configurations on the screen, but I didn't really mess around with that. A/B swap to me was the most useful one. Obviously, the original Game Boy Advance only had 2 buttons. When you map that to the Super Nintendo controller, it can feel somewhat unnatural, so they give you the option to switch that around to whatever you prefer, which I found much more useful than you would think. It has a load option, a reset option, and a save option for those specific features. In fact, it can change those features depending on which platform you're in. So if you save those settings with a Game Boy Advance game, they won't necessarily be there when you play an original Game Boy game. You change them to that, and then it'll know based on which platform it's reading which type of settings you prefer. So I didn't tinker too much with that, to be totally honest, because I was pretty happy with what it actually looked like by default. The biggest one I made changes to was just the A/B swap thing because I found that valuable. But really, that's kind of all there is to it, other than the firmware, this information about Woozle, where his Twitter handle and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that was kind of it. And you can see, I mean, granted, it's just a small little demo, but it's pretty clean looking. And then when you see the console on, it has, mine at least very specifically has this LED that's kind of like a rotating color. That was something I believe Justin did very specifically, which is very nice. I like that. But yes, it runs Game Boy Advance games perfectly well. But let's look at some other games and other questions people might have. This is a Game Boy Advance EverDrive made by the great Crix. The question is, does this work or not? And the answer is yes, of course it works, which is awesome. Although I don't have an SD card in there now, so it's not going to do anything. But if you have an EverDrive, it will function on this. But remember with EverDrives, unless this has changed over time, there's one specifically for Game Boy Advance, and then there's one that's for Game Boy and Game Boy Color. I don't remember if the Game Boy Advance one ultimately supported Game Boy or not. Maybe that has over time. Either way, all I'm trying to say is both of them work, so you'd be good either way. So you can do that. And if you want to look at the older games, obviously it does support Game Boy Color games, so I'll show one right now. This is Conquer Pocket Tales. I think this is only one of like 3 Game Boy Color games I even own. Game Boy Color was not around as long as people think. You know, but it looks great. And again, it has its own special settings. Obviously, it looks a little wonky with the, you know, the cartridge hanging out of it because they're so much bigger than Game Boy Advance games are. But who really cares? That was the same problem with this and on the actual handheld when you were playing it. They were just a different shape. But as you can see, it works just fine. One thing that's cool is you can take an original Game Boy game. Like this is Kirby's Dream Land. This is one of my all-time games. Like this was... I love this game so much. I had this as a kid. I mean, that's my name written on the back. I wrote that as a child. I still have that copy. You know, one day this will probably make a resurgence whenever we do the handheld retrospective, right? We'll pop it in there, and as you can see, it works immediately. No problems whatsoever. Now, this was, the reason we're mentioning this one specifically, is this is an original Game Boy game from the very early run, where it was just intended to run on the Game Boy. So the Game Boy Consolizer tries to add some color here and there, but it tries to do it the same way the GameCube, you know, Game Boy player did, and of course the Super Nintendo Super Game Boy, which I want to talk about here for a split second because I think it's relevant. This came out in the 90s for the Super Nintendo. The idea was exactly what I just described, which was take the Game Boy games, play them on your TV. Once this existed, though, Nintendo realized they could do a little bit more. They could use some of the Super Nintendo's capabilities to make the Game Boy games a little bit more interesting, and developers took advantage of that. So there are actually Game Boy games. You can look on the label. Kirby's Dream Land is not one of them. However, there is one here. This is Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie, the game. This one actually has a little logo on it that says it's Super Game Boy Enhanced. Now, what that basically means is, that there was a few extra lines of code in there that they could use. And those extra lines of code would result in some additional color, potentially additional features. There's whole videos breaking down specifically what that concept was. But for our purposes, the Game Boy Consolizer does see those extra lines of code and takes advantage to them as originally intended. Now, this is going to look primitive to us, but there is some additional color and feature there just because that particular cartridge was enhanced for this. See how it all kind of comes around? Isn't that kind of awesome? But yeah, as you can see, it's playing everything I've thrown at it. The only reason you're not hearing it again is that I muted it, except for that it kind of plays for a split second and then turns off. That was by design. But anyway, yeah, so it's really great. I'm very happy with it. Other than the little minor things that I mentioned before, I really had no issues with it. I also have this Japanese copy of Ghostbusters 2. I'm not even going to bother showing this. This is really just to illustrate. Game Boys are also region free, so yeah, this would work. This is a really cool game, by the way. This was ultimately the one that... This game was made by the people who made Smash Brothers eventually. Very cool. But yeah, it works region free with the PAL and the Japanese stuff. Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance. One piece of advice, though, if you do get one of these, make sure you clean the crap out of the controller port, or sorry, the cartridge port, because it's just like any other cartridge console. If it gets dirty, it's going to have a hard time reading games. So make sure you take care of that just like you would with anything else. And again, most of these that you're using are probably Game Boy Advances that were kind of salvaged. So that's probably going to be an issue, but it's a very fixable one. But yeah, that's really all there is to say about it. As you can see, it works great. I really like the design of it. I like the look of it. I will say that the case, as much as I like it, I like being able to see inside of it here. I like... You know, that it all connects together and it's lightweight and all that. I do kind of feel sometimes like I'm about to break it because it's just 3D printed plastic. And when I say that, I mean like I put a cartridge in and it creaks to the point where I'm like, is it about to break? It never has, obviously, but it doesn't feel like the same level of plastic as would be in a GameCube, which makes sense because it's 3D printed. But if we're being honest and acknowledging all of the potential ups and downs, I have to point that out. But yeah, that's, you know, the things that bother me about it are all small. Ultimately, I would say highly recommend it. If you want to get one that's like fully tricked out and you don't have to do anything, as I said, you can go to the link in the description, Power Up Gaming. Justin will hook you up. He's got them. You can also, if you have a dead Game Boy Advance laying around, send it to Justin and he won't charge you as much because you're providing that. He just, you know, does the kit installation. Again, all that stuff's on his website. But if you think you can do this yourself, hey, by all means, you can pick up the kit and make it. But either way, all I'm saying is, even though it's a few years old and I've only just now got around to it, It's new to me. I like playing with it. I think it's a lot of fun, and I think you will too. So thank you guys very much for watching. Huge shout out to Justin again for the hookup on this. If you guys could do me a favor again, please like, comment, subscribe. Check out all the social media stuff in the description. Check out the new Flying and Eating channel. Always appreciate that, and I appreciate you. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all later.